thank you so much for inviting me to speak here today. By way of introduction, I'm a director of email security products. And one of the things that I wanted to actually speak about today is looking at the implication of AI and in the context of for social good. I know that there's been so much hype and a lot of fear about using AI, but hopefully my talk today is going to break down some of that for you. Just out of curiosity, how many of you have already heard of Darktrace? Okay, wow. Just going to keep this really short. Darktrace was a company founded in 2013. We're headquartered out of Cambridge, and we've grown very, very quickly to have over 1,000 employees and 3,000 customers right now. And our customers range from across every industry, across the entire world. And the commonality of this is that everyone has the same challenge when it comes to dealing with cybersecurity. And so if we think a little bit about cybersecurity, it has really grown in the last 10 years to become one of the biggest business challenges that we face. Actually, one of the biggest challenges, not only in business, but in general, that we face. And more, we're seeing headlines such as these, with increased frequency of coverage, also increased frequency, it seems like, of attacks around the world. And two of the ones of these that I want to highlight are the Forbes and the Wall Street Journal headline, because these two have in common a very, very severe attack that they're covering on. We have a very fast-moving, very dynamic geopolitical structure around the world where tensions are high, and cyber warfare is really coming into becoming part of that arsenal. On the other side of the spectrum, we have also less politically motivated players, such as mercenaries and cyber criminals that are looking to use cybersecurity, or better, attacks on cybersecurity and on critical national infrastructure to be able to gain for financial gain. So there's a lot of money to be made, as we've seen also in the attacks against municipalities and state governments, not only in the US like Atlanta and Baltimore, but also here in the UK. We've seen a number of councils and boroughs be victims of ransomware attacks that have then been held hostage and held to ransom in order to be able to reboot their systems. The landscape is moving. We have a lot of players with a lot of different aims. We have a lot of different motivations behind attacks, but the technology landscape is also changing. And this very fast-moving technology, as more and more innovation comes into the market, we're seeing that the digital ecosystem is becoming more and more complex as well. And what does that complexity then mean? Well, it means that it's harder for us to have a notion or an understanding of exactly what is out there. Not only from a digital transformation project, but also sometimes businesses that are looking to move to the cloud, or even teams that don't involve their security teams as part of that process or in that decision. Our security teams are then just completely unaware of some of these ecosystems. And if they're unaware of these ecosystems, if they're unaware of the fact that there might be a database of customers out there in a cloud system somewhere, then how are we expecting that they would even be aware of the fact that it was hacked or compromised or accessed by somebody who shouldn't have had access to it? Not only with that, we've also got IoT devices, smart devices. We've seen in the news recently baby cameras being hacked. There are a lot of really great innovations for very good reasons. For example, insulin pumps that can automatically deliver medicine to patients. That can give us huge gains, not only from a social good point of view, but also advance efficiencies in business. But too often, then, these products are rushed to market with security being a secondary thought. And they are providing access points for criminals to be able to get into our homes and an organization. If we think about this from a factory kind of setting, if every device or every smart device, every device that is connected can become an entry point, then what does that mean for our infrastructure? What does that mean for a factory? Well, essentially, it means that any connected device can now become a doorway for an attacker. In India, we've actually seen one of our customers, they had installed a biometric reader to read the fingerprints, and they were using the fingerprint reader to monitor access to the factory floor. Very good reason for this, not only from a security and training point of view, but also, of course, there are company secrets that need to be kept safe. Well, this biometric fingerprint happened to have not been reconfigured, and a vulnerability was exploited. And a hacker who was millions of miles away was able to access the device and then use the connected device to skip over to the HR records of the company. And once they had access to the HR records of the company, they were able to change those records and introduce a whole other set of fingerprints. And so we start thinking about these spaces where we are seeing such a huge amount of convergence and think, okay, well, we want to be able to adopt that, but it does introduce an element of risk. And we need to be practical about the way that we're approaching those risks. We are also seeing then that attackers are coming up constantly with new ways of getting around barriers, getting around security protocols. And the legacy approach has been, okay, if we can predict every way in which an attacker can attack us, we can stop it from happening. And that's a really good approach, but it doesn't help us in stopping new attacks. Not only from physically, how are they going to get in, maybe through the devices, but also in things like antiviruses or malware. If we're looking for the known attacks, if we're looking for rules, if we're looking for signatures on those digital viruses, we can stop those. But every single day, attackers are innovating and coming up with new ways, new variations of that same attack that are getting by. And this innovation, this sort of novelty, is exactly what then our founders were thinking of as how are we going to face this? How are we going to fight this? So in 2013, the Darktrace founders, which were a combination of academics from the University of Cambridge, together with also intelligence experts, got together and thought, okay, how do we fight this? Starting with the premise that the attacker is already inside. How do we identify that? How do we stop the bad stuff from happening? And they looked to the immune system for inspiration. So our immune systems are some of the most complex and best evolved weapons of defense, because each and every one in this room has an immune system that is unique to each of us. It has grown and evolved with us. It does a really good job of identifying when something gets in and starts becoming a threatening action to us. And we respond in different ways. And that's the same idea. This is what gave rise to the enterprise immune system, the notion that we can use machine learning and AI to allow the computers, to allow our cybersecurity defense teams to understand uniquely the DNA of each one of our companies, and then adapt that understanding of self over time, allow the machine to learn over time as it changes and as it grows, and then fight back when something anomalous is happening, without necessarily knowing what is good or bad. And so this has given rise also to a whole new range of cyber defense tools. First is this idea of the cyber AI analyst, which is then allowing the human responders to have all the information at their fingertips and use AI machine learning to learn from our analysts over 3 years. This was a fantastic piece of research, because for years we were looking at how do Darktrace analysts investigate threats? How are we going about understanding what's happened? And then we realized that actually there were a series of steps that we could automate, and we could learn from our analysts in order to help the AI speed up that time to investigation. It dramatically reduces time to meaning. And what does that mean? It means that anyone who's in front of the computer or in front of an AI system can get to meaning faster, about 92% reduction in triage time, and get on with the business of fully understanding. So we can automate some of that out. I personally love this because we always hear about a skills gap shortage, especially in cybersecurity. One of the approaches is, of course, to increase the pipeline and people coming into the industry, but another one is using AI to lower that barrier for entry. And just like the immune system, the other great part is that once we understand that something is anomalous or potentially threatening, and our immune systems are fighting back, the machine can fight back. So we're combating machine speed attacks with machine speed responses. A machine speed response might just be slow down a connection, right? If we have a data leak going out somewhere unusual or an access that is just not normal, for example, somebody from, I don't know, I don't want to point to any country specifically here, but let's imagine access from a location that is unusual coming into your cloud environment. Well, we can stop that specific connection. In the case of ransomware, which is a very loud, very messy attack because we can see it light up, we can just stop the connection between the device and the servers. And your user would be none the wiser that that machine is being intervened on, because it's enforcing just the pattern, what we call the pattern of life, We're allowing the user and the machines to continue going on about their business on a day-to-day level, but just stop that thing that's anomalous, unusual, potentially threatening. With a lot of things with AI, seeing is believing. And what we've developed is a UI, is a user interface, and I'm sorry this isn't very, very easy to see. But it's a very visual representation of what a network or a digital business looks like. With a lot of AI products or a lot of security products, we often are looking at logs or we're looking at dashboards. Here at Darktrace, instead, we believe in visual storytelling. So we're looking at a very simple representation of the devices, the connections, the movement of data between people. So it could be laptop computers, smart printers, coffee machines, and put it into a global context to fully understand in non-technical terms what's going on in your digital ecosystem. And this goes back to my earlier point of visibility. You have to understand what your environment looks like so that you can understand when something is threatening it. What does this mean in terms of operational technology? Operational technology is really all of the technology that underpins our critical national infrastructure. So we're talking power, utility, hospitals, and there is a very compelling set of use cases that we can discuss, and I want to share with you a couple of the stories of defending OT with AI. First of all, I wanted to talk a little bit about this notion that historically, OT and IT were two separate things. So we had our systems, our IT systems, our computers, our databases, and we had the factory and sensors, and that was a separate system than, let's call it, the more business enterprise environment. What's happening is that more and more these two systems are coming together. So while the OT environment was historically also protected by a natural sort of air gap, right, the two wouldn't talk to each other, there is a lot of innovation that allows for the convergence of these two for businesses to increase efficiency, for us to be delivering better products and services to our companies, but also to be able to get better insights as to how we're operating. In fact, somebody mentioned this earlier in the discussion of how to deliver products and services or even make products and services with a reduced impact on the environment. So as we're using IT technology to understand that, and also as our environments and our factories are becoming smarter and more efficient and less of a carbon footprint impact, we're seeing more IT systems being used on OT environments rather than rewriting them from scratch. So that means that we're carrying over a whole bunch of risk of the IT systems over to our OT environments. An example of this was in 2017 in WannaCry, which was an attack that was especially designed as ransomware for IT environments, had the impact of shutting down a number of factories, including car factories, because of this convergence. However, sharing these two environments also means that we're sharing some of the tools with which we can protect IT environments into the OT environment and increase the cyber resilience on the other side, having a complete picture of what's going on across the entire network. This is very important because, as we remember from the headlines, they're being targeted like we've never seen the volume of targeting on these infrastructure and in these companies. It's targeted like never before. Every industry vertical is likely to be targeted, but especially we're seeing this around energy, transportation, and healthcare. So AI cyber warfare isn't out there something for the future. It's happening right now. And we've seen this, I've mentioned, with the fingerprints of the access control, but also we can imagine other ways with which digital can impact the physical world. So for instance, a power plant could be hacked to produce a large amount of pollution within the power plant. That puts the factory workers at risk. We can imagine also how healthcare could be targeted, where either for misdiagnosis or the wrong diagnosis, the implications could be quite dire. For state-sponsored attacks, this kind of disruption isn't a byproduct like we saw in WannaCry. It's actually the aim of the attack. One of our very first customers, there's a joke at Darktrace, you can't come to a Darktrace event and not hear about Drax. Drax Power is responsible for about 8% of all of the UK's power supply, and they were one of our very first customers. Drax has an interesting situation where they have a lot of cutting-edge technologies, new power supplies being researched, but there's also a patchwork of legacy technologies. technologies that date back to the 80s and 70s, which aren't easy to update. Patching OT environments is very difficult because you can't bring the systems necessarily down. Updating them is extraordinarily challenging. And so they were able to use AI to work on top and understand those systems without having to rip out and replace, and then use AI not only in the ICS and OT environment, but also in their corporate IT side. On the other side of the spectrum, we have smart cities, like the city of Las Vegas, that is using cutting-edge sensors and optimization to really drive the city's infrastructure. And even for a city like Las Vegas, which is, I believe, pioneering a drone delivery system, they're faced with exactly the opposite side of the spectrum in terms of challenges. Not the legacy, but the newest products, the newest things that are come to market, which we might not even be aware of where the next threat might come in through. With that, we've spoken a little bit about the ecosystem. I also wanted to speak to you a little bit about how AI might be used from the offensive side, so AI for bad. Please don't anyone take this as a roadmap for evilcore.com and think of this is the way that you're going to make your millions. I'm not endorsing this as a lifestyle, but we are seeing that AI is being used by cyber criminals to create new attacks. We're seeing this in a number of ways. You can drop AI or machine learning algorithms into an environment and just let it sit there and learn. Learn from the environment, learn from the ecosystem that it is, because those learnings are helping it then understand how to adapt, how to morph, how to go by undetected. We're seeing the starts of this already in the wild. We've also seen a huge amount of increase of phishing emails, spear phishing emails, sophisticated impersonation attacks. How many of you guys have already either seen or know of somebody who has received an email saying, hey, please send me some money, I'm the assistant of so-and-so, or I've hacked your computer, and if you don't send me money, I'm going to release some footage of you. This is happening with a huge increase of frequency. And in the context of using AI, supercharging those attacks to make them then more relevant, more personal to the victim is going to be the next big change. Because already we're seeing social engineering scraping through social media sites, gather context, maybe look at leaked emails to understand tone of communications between people. AI can supercharge that because the learnings are going to be that much faster. And as the barrier to entry to use AI tools keeps coming down lower and lower and lower, things like natural language processing, you don't need a degree from the University of Cambridge or a PhD in mathematics to be able to use this. It's stuff that's being learned and taught at first-year university courses and also online. Criminal organizations are also looking for ways to increase their revenue, increase their profitability, and decrease their costs. And AI represents a great investment for them to then increase their return on investment. I would put to you that the best way then to fight this when you don't know how to discern between the digital fake or what is actually correct and real is also with AI. Because this allows us to look beyond the things that we can see immediately. It allows us to get that 100% visibility across the entire digital ecosystem and contextually understand and accelerate that meaning back to the human defenders. And with that, thank you so much. I will open it to questions.